Validating your bearer tokens and securing your Azure functions can be a little clumsy at times, but there's a library there that can help you with that. Let's mash on that.
Hi everybody and welcome to another episode of the ASP.NET Monsters. In today's episode, we're going to take a look at validating bearer tokens in Azure Functions.
Yes, and Simon, I know this is something that's come up for us quite a few times over the last number of years, and I know you have a blog post about doing this like a very manual way, I suppose, where you're like downloading some keys and like it's not easy, right? It always has felt a little bit more clumsy than maybe it should be.
Agreed.
So this kept coming up for me over the course of a couple of months. I had done it a few times on different projects, and I was using this great sample that Brian Knox here had put together, and it kind of walks you through the process of what you need to do to do this within your Azure Functions. And it's a good walkthrough, shows you exactly what you need to do, but there was no NuGet package or anything, so it did make it a little bit hard to reuse. You had to pull the code down, bringing it into your application. So I've taken that and wrapped it into a NuGet package that we can install. So I'm just going to walk us through that process today. And I'm going to use an example for a project that I'm working on called 2 Weeks Ready, which is a project for the Humanitarian Toolbox. And this is an application that we're building that's all around emergency preparedness for families. So there's the concept of building up a family plan, building up your emergency kits so that you know that they're well stocked, that they have the things you need in them, and that everybody in the family knows where they are in an emergency. They can just grab them and go. And a few other interesting features that we're working on there. So this front end is already all built up and working, and we're using Auth0 for an identity provider for this application. So you can come in here and if I try to go to emergency kits, it's just going to forward me to the login page, and you can sign up for an account, or you can just log in, which I'm going to do. Assuming I can figure out my password. I just fat-fingered it. So now that I'm logged in, I can get to this part of the application where we see emergency kits. And if my API is running, it's going to go and grab those emergency kits from Cosmos DB based on a user ID, which I don't have yet. So that's the part that we're going to add. So far, these endpoints, these functions that are exposed as HTTP endpoints on my Azure Functions API, there's nothing here securing them. Anybody could hit that endpoint. You don't have to be logged in or anything. It's just going to go and grab things. So if I run this, I just pressed F5 there to fire that up, and it's building. There we go. So these endpoints are all available. Now when I come and refresh this page, I can see that I'm hitting my endpoint. And there's a go bag that comes back that I had added earlier, and I can come in here and add more. But that's not scoped to a user right now. We don't want every user to come in and just see every or every emergency kit. We want to scope those to a user, and we also want to make sure that only users that are signed in, have an account, can access this part of the application. So
yeah, I wouldn't want other people knowing what was in my Go kit in case
that's for sure.
My stuff looked better than theirs and they came to kill me when whatever problem it is arises.
The zombie apocalypse, right?
Yeah, my Go bag would have that astronaut ice cream in it.
Now I want to know where Simon's bag is. I hadn't even thought of putting that in mine. Okay, so we have a working front end. We have an unsecured back end. Let's see what we can do to change that. So there's a couple of NuGet packages that we're going to add, and I'm just going to do that by adding a couple package references directly in my C# project here for the 2 Weeks Ready project. And I'm just going to copy and paste them because I have them already. These are just NuGet packages. You can add them the normal ways that you do that. The Azure Functions.OidcAuthentication Authentication that's the package that I created. And then this other one is an extension to Azure Functions that allows you to wire up things like dependency injection. So we need that to configure our OIDC authentication bits. So now that I have those packages here, it's helpfully noticed that I have some dependencies there that haven't been resolved. It's going to do a .NET restore for me. Thank you, Visual Studio Code. You've always got my back. And now what we're going to do is add a startup.cs to this project. I'm not going to completely type out here, but it's really just a class that has a attribute on it here called functions startup. And it's just telling, that's telling that extensions library, the Azure Functions extensions library, that we want to run this code when the function starts up. So it's going to run this configure method, and if you're used to ASP.NET Core, this is very similar to what you see there. You have the concept of a builder, and on the builder there's a service collection, and on there you can do things like add singletons or add scope services, that kind of thing. And the package, the Azure Functions OIDC authentication package, just exposes an extension method here called add OIDC API authorization. That's all you need to do to wire this up. That does a bunch of things in the background, registering the services that we need and loading some configuration. So that's the other part we need, is in our local settings.json. We need to come in here and add a couple different OIDC API settings, or OIDC API auth settings, we call them. There's the audience and the issuer URL. So the issuer URL is the Auth0 authorization server that's going to be issuing the tokens, and then the audience is what we defined as part of our application. So up on the GitHub repo, there's some instructions for the various providers that you might be using. We have some settings, or we have some examples here around if you're using Azure AD B2C, or if you're using Auth0, and we have a ticket in there to add some samples if you're using other providers, say like Okta. We just haven't quite filled those all in yet. So now that we have...
We delaying Okta purposefully, right? For vengeance reasons.
Something like that.
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got our startup class, we have our configuration there. Now we should have everything we need to go in and start securing those specific functions that we want to secure. So I'm going to go back to my emergency kits here. Now, when you create Azure Functions, often these get generated as static.
Yes.
And we're gonna take the static part off. We don't want them to be static because we want these to be able to take part in dependency injection. And if you're static, you can't do that because you're just static. It doesn't get any, there's no constructor that you can inject things into. But what we're gonna do here is we're going to inject an IAPI authentication service here into the function. And can I do a generate constructor here? Oh, I can, but it doesn't pull in the thing I need. Let's do that.
That would have been cool.
Yeah, Visual Studio does that for me, and I really love that a lot. Okay, so I'm just injecting that API authentication into here, and now that's going to expose a method that I can call to go and authenticate my user at the entry point of my function. So within the functions that I want to secure, I'm going to now call a function called, it's an async function called authenticate async. And what it needs is the headers, because it's from the headers where we're going to go and grab that bearer token. So it needs to know what the headers are for the request. So we just pass it request.headers. And then it gives you a result, which is just an authorization result. And the way it looks, I think I can F12 into that. So an API authentication result has two Boolean values, depending on how you want to look at things. If you're a glass half empty or half full kind of person, you can check if it succeeded or failed. It gives you a failure reason if it did. And if it succeeded, it's going to give you a claims principal. So that's going to be the user that has that deserialized user that's part of that JWT token, the JWT token. So it's going to have all the claims deserialized on it. You can inspect that. So once we get the authorization result, we're just going to check if it failed or succeeded. So I'm going to be a half-empty kind of person, and say if it failed, we're gonna, well, we can log a warning. Failure reason, just so that we know if we're taking a look at our log files, and then we're going to return a new unauthorized result. So that stops the function from executing at that point. We're going to return. If we get this far, then we know that the user has been authenticated. And now I can go all these places where I've said to do get the user ID. I can actually just grab it from the authorization results. User.identity.name is where the name of the user gets, or the unique ID of the user gets placed on that claims principal. So I got a breakpoint here. I guess I'll set one up here too. Just toggling back over to that UI just so you kind of see what's happening. Am I in the right place? I am. So when it goes to call the emergency kit API, it's calling this base API instance, which uses the MSAL plugin that I built in here. You can take a look at this code. I'll link to the repo for 2 weeks ready, so you can take a look at this working example. And it just goes and grabs the token and adds it as an authorization error token. So that's how that's getting passed from the front end to the back end. Now I can run this, and we should be able to get authenticated users and some information about who that user is. All right, so I'm going to press F5 here. And hopefully I get failed as false, so that's good. We can take a look at those headers just so you can kind of see where that token was coming in. There should be a authorization header here. No, having a hard time with the, whoa. I'm zoomed in a bit too far, and this is not working well. Header authorization, there's my bearer token here. So that's a token that it's deserializing and validating under the covers with this library. And that succeeds, so now I should be able to take a look at this authorization result. Having some issues with my hovering on here, but there's my unique user ID from auth0, and then also a bunch of other claims. So on those claims, depending on how your identity provider is configured and what claims you're returning there, we have the issuer. I could also have some other information like an email address configured to come back, but for this example, I really just have the user's ID. Don't see email address actually being returned there. But it could be that's all up to you how you configure your auth provider. And switching back over here, so now I'm not seeing that other user's data. Let's just do a really quick test to make sure I got this right. I'm going to go and make sure that I can create kits and create them with the correct user ID. And then get those back. So it'll be a full end-to-end test of this. And I can't just use the auth result without going and executing that little bit of code here to authenticate the user. Now, this is a little bit of code that needs to be repeated every time. Unfortunately, there's no concept of like middleware within Azure Functions, which would be a really nice way to kind of make that a little bit more automatic. I think there might be a way to do it using some kind of annotation with an attribute, but I haven't quite found the right.
It's probably some like smart way of doing it using the dependency injection.
If you have any ideas, let me know. And we can,
it might be worth jamming on that for a little bit.
Yeah, that'd be fun. So I'd like to get rid of all that little bit of cruft. It's kind of the one piece that's making this still a little bit clumsy to work with. Okay, so I'm just going to get rid of that breakpoint. Continue. All right, so I can come in here and create a new one. I don't really know why these have colors, but they do have cool icons. I'm going to add the astronaut ice cream.
It's like a bunch of cogs that are broken together. What is that icon?
I think it's a bacteria or something.
Oh, okay.
You measure quantity of astronaut ice cream, Simon.
Well, it's mostly American, so probably in ounces.
All right, so I should be able to create this. Should get scoped to the right user. And yep, there's my Go kit here. I always like to look at this all the way through the system. Let's take a look at it in Azure or in Cosmos DB here as well. There's my new Go kit with the astronaut ice cream with the right user IDs in there and everything. So that's it.
So do you re-authenticate or re-validate that token upon every request?
Yes.
Is that considered best practice for this, or is it okay to cache the result for some period of time?
Where would you cache the result?
I don't know. I mean, you could just keep it in a memory cache, I guess, on the Azure Functions instance.
Maybe. I don't know what best practice is there. So I know that it caches like the keys that it uses to validate them. So the keys that it gets from the issuer, that part gets cached. But I think that validation of the token happens every time.
Okay.
Yeah, I guess I don't know enough about that to say what the best practice is. Good question.
Maybe somebody will comment below and tell us.
Yeah, educate us. We would love to know. But yeah, for right now, that I believe it doesn't get cached. So let's take a peek internally at what it's using, because I didn't write the validation code myself. That would be crazy. What this uses under the covers is actually, there's a CS proj on this thing. So it uses the system identity tokens, like the Microsoft code to do that. I guess it's probably under the OpenID Connect piece that it does that. And the place where the validation actually happens, so this is where it pulls out this is just pulling the token out of the request headers. And then we have I haven't looked at this in a little while. No, that's not the right place. There's a service here that does okay, so it gets the token and then gets those signing keys. And then validates the token using the security token handler wrapper. Have you seen this thing that GitHub does now?
Oh, where you can click to navigate stuff? Yeah.
So cool. Okay, so there's an implementation of that somewhere. I mean, that's just calling handler validate token using the parameters. Interesting. So yeah, that's from identity model. Tokens JWT. Good question. Wish I knew the answer. We'll dig into it.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for sharing all of this. I'm excited to use this the next time I have to authenticate people, because it's not like 100% solution to making everything good about Azure Functions and ODIC, but it feels like it's one of the more painful pieces out of the way.
Yeah, and I'm hoping this is a temporary solution, because I know they're working on some more, some better solutions around this. I know there's like the concept of easy auth that you can turn on in your Azure Functions when you're deployed, and that will kind of automatically do some of this for you, but you can't reproduce it locally. So for me, that's a bit of a difficult situation to try to, like, you can't test locally, you can't run through the same logic locally where you're actually working with authenticated users. makes it a little hard to test. So it's nice to be running the same thing locally and when you're deployed. I know they're working on some solutions around that. So hopefully this is just a stopgap to get us through until there's a better supported solution that comes out from Microsoft.
Awesome. Great. Well, thank you everybody for joining us on today's episode. I'm contractually obligated to remind you to like, comment, and share. So do that, I guess. And we'll see everybody on next week's episode. Bye.
Bye.